if you look at dictators in history, Hitler being a perfect example, he had a similar arrogance that the German Nazi regime could still win even after the Allies had attacked him through Normandy and invaded mainland Europe. And the Russians were coming in from the east, but he still believed that the German military could prevail and could win. Putin is in the same position. He's got that, put himself into this bubble where he believes that the Russian military cannot lose and therefore must win. He's hearing noises coming out of Donald Trump in the United States, where we saw the restriction in the supply of some weapons to Ukraine, and saw that as a green light that Ukraine wouldn't have the weapons to defend itself. He hears the statements coming out of the Chinese, where the Chinese say they can't let the Russians lose, and therefore that emboldens him further. And then we've got his inner circle, and his inner circle will be giving Vladimir Putin what he wants to hear rather than the real truth, because if they give him the real truth, then they'd end up taking up a window cleaning job and falling out of the 14th floor, or committing suicide, or something else would happen.
Let's also cover recent Donald Trump's remarks on Putin. US President Donald Trump on Tuesday said that Vladimir Putin was throwing a lot of bullshit at the United States. Quote, "We get a lot of bullshit thrown at us by Putin. He's very nice to us, but it turns out to be meaningless." Do you see this as the biggest breakthrough in Donald Trump's thinking about the war in Ukraine, about his strategy?
I do see it as a breakthrough. Donald Trump is finally beginning to realize something that the rest of us have known for a long time, that Vladimir Putin is playing him. He's playing him like a grandmaster, the grandmaster spy that he is, and he's been manipulating Donald Trump to do Putin's wishes in many ways, with the lack of support going into Ukraine and the political confusion he's causing around the world. Donald Trump is waking up to that. Now, he's woken up to it today. Whether he stays woken up to it tomorrow is a different matter, because Trump changes his mind. But I fear that Donald Trump is getting bored with the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and will potentially use his realization of what Putin is up to as an excuse to walk away a little bit more. I don't think he's going to walk away completely, but I think he might distance himself a little more from actively participating and trying to pursue some form of peace agreement.
Also, according to CNN, Donald Trump told a private gathering of donors last year that he once threatened Putin to bomb, quote, "the shit out of Moscow," according to audio obtained by CNN. What is your reaction to this, and what do you think about the timing of this publication, of this leak? Because this was published several days after Trump made first harsh statements, remarks about Vladimir Putin.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the timing by CNN was opportunistic. They've had it for a while, and they took the opportunity after what Trump had said to improve the number of clicks that they would get. We call it clickbait on their story, and it's a very relevant story, and it will continue to push the momentum. Of course, Donald Trump refers to CNN as fake news, so it won't have affected him that much. But it's the messaging is important. Whether Vladimir Putin is sitting and listening to it or not, I don't know, because there's nothing really coming out of Moscow to suggest that he is beginning to realize that Donald Trump isn't there for him in the way that he's been there for him beforehand. And if I were Vladimir Putin and reading everything properly, I'd be very worried at the moment. Donald Trump saying that he would bomb the shit out of Moscow, he shoots from the hip. He uses language that's deliberately inflammatory in many of the things that he does. And interestingly, we're seeing him using increasingly undiplomatic language, even to the mainstream media, as he said whenever he was talking about Iran and Israel, and the potential for the ceasefire that was between them breaking down. He swore on camera, which is very unlike Donald Trump and very unlike any global leader.
Also, US President Donald Trump told NBC on Thursday that he struck a deal with NATO for the US to send weapons to Ukraine throughout the alliance, and that NATO will pay for those weapons 100%. What is your assessment of this big another deal made by Trump and NATO allies?
I think Trump will like the fact that it's a deal. Is it unusual? No, it's not unusual. If we go back to the Second World War and we look at the weapons that the United States supplied to the UK and to other allies during the Second World War, it was on a Lend-Lease deal. It took us right up into the middle or late in the 20th century before we had finished paying off that. So, the United States is known for asking for what it's supplying to be paid for. And of course, we had all the controversy around Donald Trump complaining about what Joe Biden had been giving to Ukraine for free and had put a ridiculous sum of money against it. It was nowhere near that worth of weapons and ammunition that the United States had supplied. But everything to Donald Trump has got a dollar sign in front of it. So from an international community perspective, NATO countries who can afford it offering to pay for US weapons to supply to Ukraine, I think is a good solution for keeping the status quo and keeping the United States on side.
Also, yes, President Trump said on Monday that he plans to send additional defense weapons to Ukraine. President Trump used this phrase, this word, defense weapons, but according to Axios, also not only defensive, but also offensive weapons could be supplied to Ukraine as a part of this big deal between the US and NATO. What are the chances that the US would finally authorize supply not only of defensive but also offensive weapons as a part of this deal?
Well, I think the best form of defense is offense. And therefore, I think Donald Trump is using his words. The reality is the weapons that have always been supplied will continue to be supplied. An armored vehicle is a defensive weapon. It is defending troops on the front line from getting killed by enemy artillery. If that armored vehicle just happens to have a turret on it and a gun and a tow anti-tank weapon, it can be used for offensive purposes as well. But Donald Trump could justify it as defensive. I think the two important things that need to come from the United States for Ukraine are, one, the Patriot air defense missiles, because those are the only ones that can deal with the Russian hypersonic missiles, and with some of the Russian ballistic missiles, and continued access to US intelligence for targeting purposes, so that the Western weapons that are being supplied can still rely on US targeting data to come into them to allow Ukraine to accurately hit Russian military targets. The rest of it, I think, when it comes to ammunition and artillery shells, US defense industrial base is important, but I think the European defense industrial base is stepping up fast enough to be able to start to fill that void relatively soon. And if America can be kept on side and keep supplying those weapons for another year to 18 months, then Europe will be able to pick up the slack if America decides to withdraw further.
I would like also to hear your assessment of this incident with halting weapons shipment to Ukraine. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth did not inform the White House before he authorized a pause on weapons shipment to Ukraine last week, according to CNN's sources. Do you really believe that Pete Hegseth was acting on his own when he was pausing these shipments of weapons to Ukraine?
I think there's two potential answers to this. One, yes, it could have been Pete Hegseth acting on his own. We know that he has been very anti-supplying US weapons to Ukraine. He is more anti than Donald Trump has been beforehand. And this could have been a decision by him to turn around and say, no, we're not supplying it. However, I think a more likely scenario is that, as the latest supply has been entered into the US supply chain computer systems, something is flagged up to say our national stocks are getting too low. You need to make sure that we've ordered more things before they come in. And that red flag, someone at a more junior level will have said, oh, we can't send this stuff until we know that we're getting new deliveries in, and therefore we'll have put a halt on it without clearing it through those that would then clear it through the White House and everything else. So it could have been Pete Hegseth trying to overstep his authority and not inform the White House, but it's more likely to be a lower level individual who's responding to something where the computer said no. As soon as the White House became aware of it, I think Donald Trump was embarrassed, and he has made statements that suggest he has reversed that decision, and that the continued flow of weapons is ongoing, and therefore it allowed Russia to exploit the confusion in the information domain, but I don't think it's going to have a massive impact on what Ukraine needs to defend itself. That's coming from the United States at the moment.
Don't you think that another reason for this development could be the lack of national security officials in the White House due to the fact that the US doesn't have its own national security advisor right now and properly working National Security Council?
It could be. I think there's a lack of coordination of activity in the White House. You've got Donald Trump, who is making all of the decisions. Those in his cabinet get invited in to just rubber stamp Donald Trump's decisions. But then we've got the likes of Hegseth in the U.S. Department of Defense, who he's an interesting character. He's not someone who has got the experience to run such a large department. He doesn't understand how politics works and therefore could have naively made this decision without clearing it. I don't think there is any real coordination across government in the United States in a way that would make decision-making that we would expect in a country of that level to be as coherent as we would hope it would be. And that's why there has been confusion, and I think in the future there will be confusion. Now, Vladimir Putin loves that because he will play into it and try and create as many opportunities to create as much confusion in the future as possible. Unfortunately, the rest of us, and in particular Ukraine, suffer when that confusion happens because we don't know whether Ukraine is going to get what it needs to defend itself or not. And that is something that I think we're just going to have to realize and put up with and try and mitigate in other ways for the whole of the time that Donald Trump is president.
Let's also cover a sanctions bill against Russia. U.S. Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal said that the sanction bill could be enforced, could be imposed, and could be adopted as early as this month in July. Yep. And also, yes, President Donald Trump supports this bill. Do you expect the positive outcome of this voting process in Congress, and do you expect Trump to enforce this bill, this document?
I do, but I'm slightly hesitant in saying that I do, because I think the support is there in Congress and in the Senate. Donald Trump this week is supporting the idea. Next week, he may change his mind. And as we've seen with the tariffs that he's imposed internationally, he always says something will happen in the future because he's always trying to get a deal. We know in the language that he's used with regard to Vladimir Putin and Russia that he wants business deals out of Russia. He wants to find some form of economic cooperation. And therefore, if Vladimir Putin reached out and tried to offer that, then I think the sanctions deal might just disappear again for a while. Putin, I think, has got an arrogance, though, and I don't think he's going to reach out because he thinks he can win militarily. That's what's really winding Donald Trump up. Donald Trump doesn't understand someone who doesn't want to do business deals, whether they're actual deals or perceived deals, because I think most of Donald Trump's business deals are perceived, and there's nothing in them that is delivering good business for the United States.
Let's cover our final topic for today. China. You mentioned about China in your previous answers, but Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told EU's top diplomat that China can't accept Russia losing this war against Ukraine, as this could allow the US to turn its full attention to China. What is your reaction to this?
Yeah, well, China is very concerned about U.S. politics. If you look at some of the statements that Donald Trump made whenever he first came into power about Canada and about Panama and about Greenland, if you look at that, it's all about the movement of goods from the Pacific into the Atlantic and into the United States. And it was all the movement of China, and it was Chinese influence over it, whether it be through the northern routes, through the Arctic, as global warming opens up some of the Arctic routes, or through the Panama Canal, where China had a growing control over access to both sides of the Panama Canal and transit through it. Donald Trump has said that China and Southeast Asia is his priority. And of course, China is the second largest economy in the world and has got ambitions to become the largest economy in the world, knocking the United States off that spot. So China will be very happy with anything that is taking US diplomatic focus, political focus, and military focus away from focusing on what China's doing as it tries to increase its pressure around Taiwan. And therefore, that's why we will get statements like this coming out of Chinese officials. Whether they will actively do anything or not to further support Russia, like giving Russia access to proper Chinese weapons or putting troops on the ground, I think China will stop at that because they would be concerned about getting Western sanctions against China. China is enjoying cheap Russian oil at the moment, and China is enjoying other natural resources coming from Russia, and that's what it's getting out of the relationship with Putin. It's trying to play both sides at the moment and trying to be clever. And if it can cause disruption, it will cause disruption, because China is slowly but surely trying to increase its influence in Southeast Asia, but also in South America, and then reinforce its influence throughout Africa. China's playing a long game. The United States is playing whatever Donald Trump's decision is tomorrow morning's game. And it worries me. It very much worries me.